Joel's going to lead a song to pull us in. Shh. All right, brothers, let's go. Hardest group to pull in hardest group to pull in is a church, man, and fellowship break. Okay. These guys are serious about time, so I want to get started, okay? So before I start this section, I want to make something really clear, okay? Culture is not the enemy. In fact, I think culture is a gift from God in the sense that it is humans doing what God has allowed them to do, which is just make sense of their reality. So that's not what I'm saying. I hope I'm communicating that clearly. But as we engage culture, there's two postures that are really typical. There's more in between, but these are two general postures. One is to condemn culture. You can see this in groups that just isolate. Let's just get out of here and build a wall and call ourselves something and leave this world. Or to conform. And I'm not suggesting we do either one. As Christians, we're called to engage our culture. Now, one thing you have to realize is we're not called to change our culture. That is a value of progressive theology. We've got to change the systems of this world. We're not actually called to do that. But we're called to impact it with the power of the gospel. We're Christians. We need to engage our culture. But here's the thing. We can't allow ourselves to conform to it. And honestly, it's easier to conform than it is to faithfully engage it. Here's another thing, okay? On the bottom, we need to avoid the polarized responses to culture. On the left is just despair and negativity, and the right is just optimism. Despair sees everything as negative. We're toast. Culture's from the devil. Let's get out of here. Optimism, on the other hand, is naive, and it fails to see the danger or really understand how Satan works. One person said to me, I am neither pessimistic nor optimistic. I'm hopeful. Guys, we're Christians. Jesus has won the battle. That's what the book of Revelation says. Nothing can touch us. Nothing. There is no reason for despair. Like I said before, this current culture is a reason for optimism because it's going to make people more open to real truth. Despair leads to withdrawal and isolation. Optimism leads to what theologians call unthinking conformity or assimilation. In my opinion, the number one threat to the church today is not persecution. We live in America, for crying out loud. There's not many things they can do to persecute us, but it is assimilation. Wake up one day and you just think like the culture, and ministers go, what just happened? Being hopeful means that, yes, we see the danger and the agenda of culture that Satan's injecting in there, but we know that Christ is the supreme, the gospel is the answer, and we rejoice in that. There is no fear here. It's faith and hope. Look what Jesus said in John 16. I've told you these things so that you may have peace. We can have peace in this world. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world. I send my kids to public school. Scares me to death these days. Satan's weaving his magic. Jesus has overcome the world. I just need to help my parents understand what's happening in that dynamic. So what do we need to do as leaders? We need to disciple the hearts and the minds of our people and help them see through culture. People today in the church live in culture, but they don't see through it. We need to help them see it more clearly and teach more clearly. The opening scripture was teaching the word plainly. Let's never forget that. We don't need games, rhetoric, tricks, hoops. We need none of that. Sam and Jerry came about 10 years ago to a marriage retreat in Seattle. And we were running the retreat. We got a lot of time with them, and we're having lunch with them. And I said, guys, I've got kids. They're in middle school and high school. What's your one sort of nugget of wisdom? One thing, man. He said, oh, that's easy. Teach your kids to see through the world. You can't take them out of the world, but if they see through it, they understand the truth. Let's talk about the thinking behind progressive theology. It's radical postmodern thought. Now, on your handout, there are QR codes, and there's a packet On the back it says there's a packet of PDFs. There's reading material for like a year in there, okay? So enjoy. But it goes through a lot of these things in ways that I just don't have time to, and I hope you find them helpful. It's the things I talk about. Here's what postmodernism says. It says traditions from the past are not to be trusted. They've let us down. Everything about life in church is to be reimagined. Authority is to be questioned. Authority got us in trouble in the first place. And it says there's no objective truth like the Bible. There's no real universal truth outside of what you and I think and feel. That's what it says. I can see that in the church sometimes. All judgment, by the way, of any kind is evil and wrong, so avoid it. Postmodern thought today is a dramatic turn inward. Dramatic turn inward. This is how people, especially the young ones in our church, are being taught to think. They're bathed in it. I know they got baptized, but have you noticed when you baptize someone, they don't come out with a fresh, clean worldview. They just don't. They import their worldviews into the church as redeemed people, and we have to help redeem their worldview. And ours too. So how does this stuff look in the church today? It's just a few things. Might look different from you. But if you have college students, here's what my wife said. Make sure, Daren, you're talking to small church leaders. It's not the same as like some guy in New York City or LA. I get that. But if you have families in your ministry, if you've got public schools in your city or a university in your city, or teens on social media, you'll see this embedded in their atmosphere. Postmodernism said, since judgment is evil and there are multiple ways coming to truth, let's affirm all people's reality is true. We certainly want to affirm people's experiences, don't we? But that in no way means it represents truth. Nowadays, scholars are calling it the age of affirmation. We're expected not only to accept someone's life choices, but we're expected to celebrate it, stand with them, march with them, and acknowledge the truth of their claims, even if they go against biblical convictions. There's a PDF in that packet called How Terms Have Changed Over the Last 30 Years. I'm telling you, you got to go through this with your wife. It will blow your mind how words 30 years ago mean something different under today's radical postmodern thought. So enjoy the reading later, you know what I'm saying? Might put you to sleep, but you need that too. Postmodern thinking has a sneaky way of affecting evangelism. You don't know this, but it's true. Here's how it works. Truth becomes so complicated to pin down. Judgment is so frowned upon that we lose heart and we just become apathetic to the world. And we don't engage. Who wants to have conversations about sin these days with people who don't even think sin exists? They're just too hard and controversial. One author suggests that it is creating a society where indifference is fashionable. In fact, I believe this post or anti-Christian reality is at least one reason church growth is stagnant or shrinking in North America and Canada. I was on a Zoom call with the evangelists a month or so ago, and the guy opened it up by saying, the churches in North America and Canada are not growing, and outside of them, they're growing. And I said, I know. I said that in my heart. I didn't say that on the Zoom call. Lots of times it's because people outside of North America and Canada still have a high view of Scripture and a traditional view of the Bible. So before we go, what's wrong with you, bro? Why isn't your church growing? Can we put our thinking caps on and realize that we may not be equipping our churches like we need to? I mean, I can make a pretty good theological case that a true progressive church results in no real need for personal conversions, am I right, Sean? Or baptisms, but only a commitment to personal fulfillment and the eradication of social problems. It's no small thing. In a progressive church, baptisms eventually cease. There's no need for them. It's also affecting human identity. You've noticed this. I have a lesson on biblical sexuality that I do, and I did it with my church. And I carefully explain how postmodern thought is the fuel behind our current efforts to base our identity completely around gender. Can you believe we've decided to do that as a society? You can see society wrestle with it. Babies now are in charge of their own gender in the really radical way. I'm from Seattle, so this is going to shock you, but there's a movement in Seattle to stop calling babies babies. They need to be called they-bies. I'm not kidding. I didn't make that up. People always say, you made that up. I didn't. Because they can choose their own gender. I think we've lost our mind. I mean, seriously. And I think it's a profound mistake. We are going to regret this. Our identity as image bearers of God is set, and it's beautifully. And by the way, it's unapologetically laid out in Scripture with relationship, with love, and with boundaries. That's the God we serve. God created sexuality. Humans created sexual identity. Don't get that twisted. God didn't create sexual identity. We did. By the way, like it or not, ministers today are afraid to preach this stuff this clearly from the pulpit. And again, you need to get advice on how you preach this stuff from the pulpit, right? But they're afraid. I've heard them say, I'm afraid to say there's two biological sexes or that marriage is between a man and a woman. It's just going to be too much hassle. And that's a dynamic driven mostly by social pressure. Guys, this should concern us. Humans are entitled to, as humans, we're entitled to our own beliefs. We are not entitled to our own spiritual truths. Postmodernism and progressive theology is confusing the two. Mark Sayers writes a lot about this, and he says progressive theology seems to be building a kingdom without a king. We serve King Jesus. He says what we can do in life. Now, I would adjust that a little bit and say progressive theology seems to be building a kingdom with self as king. Or with culture as king, or fear of being canceled as king. So what do we do about it? We teach our people to be biblically resilient. I want to put out some practicals as we end this. Over the last 30 to 40 years, Sean St. Jean, who's a really good friend of mine, he can tell you this, research into mental health has shown that the ability for children to build resiliency in their life has a direct impact on how well they function in that life. In a very real and general sense, resiliency is just the ability to come through when things don't go as planned. Do things, as a Christian, sometimes not go as planned? I mean, someone's going to talk about that in the next class, I think. I mean, there's a book on spiritual trauma out there. Things do not always go as planned, but how do we live a life where it doesn't flatten us all the time? It's resiliency. Prepares our kids for life, for failure or disappointment, for being hurt or offended. This is biblical resilience. Oh, whoops. Well, that's a song. All right. He's like, you know what? You're done. You're done. Get off the stage. Sorry, dude. Okay, there we go. Woo! This is from a parenting workshop that we do called Biblically Resilient Parenting in a Complex and Confused World. My wife and I do it. By the way, actually, let's go back to resilient for a second. This is just what it means. Someone or something that's returning to its original shape after being damaged. You know, the entire country right now is talking about being more resilient, but here's the thing. They're just using more secular ideas on how to teach resiliency. I don't really need their help anymore. They've gotten us into this mess. I would like to use Scripture. They just keep making the problem worse. Biblically resilient says this, using the Scriptures to define life's experience, letting them form you. Not seeing all of life's disappointments or disillusionments as traumatic or bad, but instead seeing them as a necessary part of our spiritual maturity. It says that when you submit to Jesus' lordship and trust Him, you're going to be secure and safe and content. You just will. The very things people want. I'm starting a website called biblicallyresilient.com, and it's going to be based on three things. One, the Bible is the primary source for all truth and evangelistic engagement. Two, we need to equip people for biblical cultural discernment. And three, we need to continue to develop a biblical, creative, and faithful missional vision. There's a young Matthew's over here. He's on the Dallas staff as a campus intern. He's been helping me make this website. And I asked him, what does biblically resilient mean to you? Here's what he said. This is so perfect. Great definition, bro. To me, being biblically resilient means being able to weather the cultural influences of the world and have scriptural truth remain unaffected in my heart. If I am biblically resilient, no false pretense of argument or argument of man can set itself up against me to twist God's truth in the eyes or my heart. I couldn't have said it better. I went to the ICMC. All kinds of young kids said, this is what I want, and we're not talking about it. And listen, it's not just the next generation that needs this conversation. It's our older people And it's our leaders. Look, our ministers and elders need this conversation. Can the elders in your church, even in a basic way, navigate people through this? They need to be. The Bible says they are actually, one of their main roles is upholding sound doctrine and refuting those who oppose it. So we need to at least train them in the basics of it, right? Barna research. Barna says this: not understanding how to guide people through all of these complex cultural issues is causing ministers a lot of anxiety. It's causing some of them to leave ministry. This ain't the ministry my grandfather used to leave. It's not. So don't treat it like that. Don't just get up there and think you can do the first principles again and people go home and they get it. I'm never being invited back, am I? That's okay. There's more. But there's two things we can help people in our church to be biblically resilient. One has to do with preaching, and the other with equipping. Number one point, avoid driving into a ditch. I mean, that's just as theological as I want to get. Don't drive into a ditch. A friend of mine puts it like this: there's a ditch right here there's a road with two ditches on a ditch on either side. He says, we're driving down a road, try not to veer into ditches on either side of the road. The first ditch on the right is rigid and inflexible legalism. There's only one way to do things. Does that sound familiar? The second ditch, because we overcorrect, we go, poof. The other ditch is trying too hard to be culturally relevant, and because we've been rigid and inflexible, let's just leave the doors open for everything. Mistake. We don't want to drive into either ditch. Now, let me say a little bit more about these ditches. On the right side, people on that ditch tend to teach the Bible in a very rigid, scientific way. Just it says it, do it, fruit. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about. We're from the Church of Christ. Don't act like you know what I'm talking about. By the way, a lot of the way we oversimplify the biblical hermeneutic is why we have such fertile soil for progressive theology. Our people are dying for a more creative missional imagination. They are. But this hermeneutic on the right tends to oversimplify truths in the Bible that are a bit ambiguous and mysterious. There's things I'm going to study out for the rest of my life, and I'm like, I have no idea what God is talking about here. Well, we're Church of Christers. We don't like mystery. Mystery is really weird. We got to know. But over time, it can lead to legalism and deep frustration, especially if things don't go as planned, and at times they won't. But then, when we overcorrect, there's the left ditch that tends to teach the Bible in a very open-ended, unscientific way. These progressive theologians prefer to see the Bible as God's gift of wisdom to us, but are really careful not to draw any lines, make any imperatives, or say things too harshly because they might offend people. Open doors are always preferred to closed ones. In the PDF packet on your sheet there, if you scan it, there's 10 things to look for to see if progressive theology is seeping into your church. But this is one of them. In the left ditch, the Bible will guide us, but each autonomous individual frames life in their own context and journey. And now, while that's partially true, this hermeneutic tends to soften the message of the gospel, especially around sin and righteousness. Look, God has some hard edges in the Bible. We are not allowed to soften them. If God says something is a sin, end of discussion. Now, let's not go to the other ditch, and if things are soft edges in the Bible, sharpen them up. We can't do that either. We can't be nicer or meaner than God. What we need is a hermeneutic that's middle of the road. And in my pea brain, here's how it works. If moral issues are clear in the Bible, preach them clearly. If you're afraid to get up and say homosexuality is a sin, now expand on that a little bit, right? But if you're afraid, you shouldn't be preaching. If there's ambiguity and mystery, though, in the Bible, treat it like that. Be humble. Ask more questions. Don't say we know when we don't know. We need a third way. We also need to know as we preach that people are being trained to be triggered and offended by everything. So let's avoid the temptation to soften the hard edges of God's message, But let's preach with nuance. Let's preach with skill. Let's work on our craft and make sure that we're slicing through Satan's schemes. I got to tell you, I'm going to skip those two. There's too much. These are some of the, one's upside down. Sweet. Okay. These are some of the people that I've preached to lately. These are all college students. I am freaked out talking about this stuff to college students. Like in these rooms, there's no one over 35 years of age, and I go into these rooms and I lay it out. I mean, in more detail than I'm doing to you. And then I'm like, this is it. My life's over. I'm going to get off the stage and I'm going to get totally canceled and destroyed. You know what happens? Line of students. And of course, there's a few, like the transgender girl. That's fine. Most of them, I didn't mean that so, you know what I'm saying. Most of them, though, and I tell you, I'm like, please be gentle. What's your feedback? Most of them are like, this is our world. You're talking about where we live. Keep going. And over they say, we need more direction in it. We need direction in a lot of things in the churches. But if we avoid this one, we're doing our young people a disservice. I know why it's hard, though, because if you step into it, there's a few young people that just blast you. I get it. But as I said before, we need courage. After the ICMC lesson, I got 60 emails. I counted them up. All of them saying, please, more. I was in a city with a larger church, and I was speaking, and there were probably 500 people in this audience. And this is really scary, and I'm scariest thing, when you talk about this stuff and you say, okay, Q&A, right? Woo, that's hard. But I was in this church, and there was a young man right over here, and I can see him like it was yesterday. He raised his hand. I said, yes, young man. And I thought he was going to get up and say, you're an idiot. He didn't. He said, I'm 16 years old. I got baptized 6 months ago. This is my life at school. Everything about my life is this. And I come to church week in and week out, and no one talks about any of this stuff. How am I supposed to discern what's right and wrong? There's a book called Faith for Exiles, Kinnaman and Matlock. One of the biggest complaints of the younger generation is the Bible teaching I receive in my church is not relevant to my life. Again, don't talk about this stuff every Sunday. Don't do it. Don't avoid it, please. It's crucial to our growth. Clear biblical teaching in a complex and confusing time is what we need. Second, we need to teach our people cultural discernment, responsible cultural discernment. We need to equip our people. If I could just speak only to leaders, I would. House church leaders, small group leaders, staff. That would be enough for me because we could talk about how to equip our people for Christianity in such a crazy world. It's probably the greatest need for you in smaller churches is around families. Your families. Look, we're ministers in here. We lose sight of how difficult this is because we get to spend time mostly with other Christians. No one's saying, dude, before you talk to me, please use my correct pronoun. No one's saying that at staff meeting. But they're saying it at work and school. And they don't know how to react. So you know what they do? They just go, fine, I'll do it. Whoa, time out. I was speaking at a larger church, and I did Q&A again, totally freaked me out. But this guy right over here, kind of where Mark is, stood up. He's about 50 years old, and he said, I'm so glad you're talking about this. I am buried in this stuff at work, and I want to be a good employee, but I also want to be a faithful Christian, and I don't know how to do that. Our people need to be equipped. Guy Hammond, a really good friend of mine, just got back from Indonesia, and I said, what are you doing in Indonesia? He spent 3 weeks over there. I said, do they struggle with this stuff over there? Same-sex attraction? He said, no. Nope. What's happening is all the kids in the church, because we're part of a global society, have social media. So they're bringing all these Western conversations into the church, and the parents are just falling around, just with discouragement. I don't care which size your church is or where it's at. We need to teach cultural discernment. In Faith for Exiles, it says, cultural discernment is the ability to compare the beliefs, values, customs, and creations of the world we live in with those of the world we belong to. They want this. And did you notice that statement starts with the idea that we help our younger people understand they don't belong to this world. Progressive theology says you are tethered to this world. That's false. How do we make sense of this stuff in the world? I could give you a lot more examples, but the best thing you can do as a church leader is to educate yourself in this world. Educate yourself in the world that the families are dealing with, the students, your college students. By the way, if you have a college university in your very small, bucolic town, that is a progressive city, a college or university. Well, we have a private one. Don't care. It's there too. Know the language. Know the arguments. Pray over it. Know how to discern. Study it out. Talk about these things. Your parents are dealing with it. Get outside help. Get coached up. Have a speaker and do whatever, but start somewhere, which is what I want to end you with. I've got resources. Rob says, make sure you come with resources. Well, I've got them. Now, biblicallyresilient.com, please pray for that. It's coming soon. It's being built. It'll be a website that provides resources for teaching, equipping, evangelism in a post-Christian world. And it's all going to be free. Now, there's a QR code up on the I love QR codes. They're on the right. If you're interested in the launch or want to be on a newsletter or just want to get a hold of me or tell me I'm awesome or crazy, then, hit that and then just send me a note. And there's all kinds of QR codes on your handouts. Also, there's 4 workshops that I've put together. And I'm just trying to help. I'm a church leader trying to help. And I think these are most useful for leaders, all except the parenting class. Parents are on the front lines of discipling hearts and minds. The first workshop is called Wildfire. It's just an introduction to our current missional reality. Basically, I think it's more for staff or lay leaders, your leadership, your elders, right? Stuff like that. But it's just a deeper dive into the stuff we're talking about right now. There's one called Biblically Resilient Parenting and Youth Ministry in an Increasingly Complex World. That's just, guys, we cannot teach parenting devotionals today like it's 1988. Child disobeys you, spank them. Have a devotional every week and see you at church next. I mean, we can't do that anymore. Our parents are like, I did a parenting class in Tampa on this stuff, line of parents, and gender dysphoria, pronouns, bisexuality, social justice issues. I mean, all of it. Parents are like, what do I do with this stuff? Talk to my elder. They have no idea. So I'm just trying to bring this up to date a little bit in the parenting workshop. Then there's one called Biblically Resilient Leaders. I think we need to minister to our leaders a lot more because they're on the front lines of this stuff and help them stay grounded. And then there's the last one, and this is a new one, Out of Season, Clear and Compassionate Preaching for Confusing Times. How do we talk about this? How do we know our audience? How do we faithfully speak about it, but don't just crush everybody? How do we not avoid it, but speak plainly? If you're interested in any of these resources, reach out to me, let me know, send me a note. I'm just glad you're willing to listen. Thank you for inviting me. I want to leave you with one little video. It's 60 seconds, and I have a minute and a half. I can see it right here, okay? So calm down, Joel. This is another young lady who heard me at the ICMC, and she said, I want to help whatever you need. I want to help. This is it. Get up, walk around, run around, do whatever. Scan it, right? But this young lady, I said, what does biblically resilient mean to you? She lives in Canada. She's like, this is the most important conversation we have. So this is what she says. Can you start that video? So good. I hope we can play it. Oh no, I have 38 seconds left. Is it not going to work? Whoa. All right. It's pretty awesome. She basically says what Matthew says. What she basically says was, the Scripture's first, primary, and the only thing that's going to help me stay faithful in this world. People are asking to be equipped. People are asking for clear preaching and direction in this stuff. I pray we have the courage to do it. I love all you guys. I'm praying for you in your churches. We're all in this together. And remember, hopeful, not fearful. God bless you.